If you're listening to this alone right now, especially on a night shift, you might want to turn on the lights, or at least make sure you're not the only person awake in the building. Because the 3 stories you're about to hear didn't come from horror movies or some writer's imagination. They came from people who work the kinds of shifts most of us never see. The ones where the clock moves slower after midnight, the corridors feel too long, and the silence feels wrong, like it's hiding something. They wrote to me insisting what they experienced was real, and that telling it might be the only way to feel sane again. Whether you believe them or not, that's your choice. Just remember, they thought they were alone too, right up until the moment they realized they weren't. The first story comes from a man I'll call Arjun. At the time this happened, he was 24 years old and working as a night security guard in a mid-sized IT park on the edge of a big city. On paper, it was the safest kind of security job you can have. Corporate office, cameras everywhere, private patrol car that did a quick round twice a night, and only one entrance to worry about between midnight and 6 in the morning. But if you've ever worked nights, you know safety doesn't always feel like safety. It just means there's more distance between you and help if something goes wrong. Arjun's job was simple. At 10 p.m., the evening shift guard would hand over the keys, logbook, and handheld radio. From that point, Arjun would sit in the glass security booth near the main gate, watch the monitors, and do one internal round every hour. Most of the IT employees left by 11:30 p.m., and the tech park would go from buzzing to dead silent in less than an hour. After midnight, the only people usually inside any of the buildings were a handful of coders on impossible deadlines and the housekeeping staff that came through to clean floors and empty trash cans. The building he watched over had 5 floors. The first 3 were rented out to different companies, each with their own reception area and open-plan workspaces. The 4th and 5th floors belonged to a startup that preferred to work late, so their lights stayed on longer. The main lobby had a few couches, a reception desk, and a long corridor that led to the elevators and a fire exit door. There were cameras on every floor, one facing each elevator door, one in each corridor, and a cluster in the basement parking area. Those camera feeds showed up in tiny squares on the old CRT monitor in Arjun's booth, flickering softly in the dim light. He'd been working there for about 6 months without anything more exciting than asking teenagers to stop loitering at the entrance or redirecting the occasional drunk who wandered in thinking the building was a hotel. The boredom was the hardest part. To stay awake, he would make strong tea on a small electric kettle he wasn't technically supposed to have, scroll through his phone, or look out at the empty main road, where a bus might pass every half hour or so. The routine, he told me, was so fixed that he could feel the time without checking the clock. 10 past 1 felt different from 10 past 3 in his bones. It started on a Tuesday, sometime in early winter. The air outside was cold enough that his breath fogged up the glass when he leaned too close to it. Inside the booth, a small pedestal fan hummed on low, more out of habit than need. By 12:30 a.m., almost everyone had left the building, and the housekeeping staff had swiped out. Arjun logged it in the register, noted, "All clear," and settled in with his second cup of tea. He glanced at the monitor out of habit, letting his eyes roam over the grid of grayscale images. Ground floor lobby, empty. Parking lot, empty except for a few cars with their alarms blinking. 3rd floor, dark. 5th floor, lights off, nothing moving. 4th floor corridor. He frowned and leaned closer. There, in the frame showing the 4th floor corridor, a figure was standing near the far end, close to the fire exit door. The image was grainy, but he could make out the shape clearly. Someone in a light-colored shirt, maybe white, and dark trousers. The posture was slightly hunched, as if the person's shoulders were rolled forward. What bothered Arjun immediately was not just that they were there, but how still they were. The figure didn't shift its weight, didn't turn its head, didn't move at all. It was like the image had frozen, except the timestamp in the corner was still ticking. At first, Arjun thought it must be someone from the startup working late. Maybe they'd gone to make a call near the fire exit for better reception. But then he remembered, earlier that night, around midnight, he'd watched the last 2 employees from the 4th floor swipe out and take a cab from the gate. Their ID numbers and exit times were in his logbook. He checked it again to be sure. Last out from 4th, 008. No entries after that. Nobody else had gone in. His heart began to beat a little faster. He told himself the camera feed was glitching, or maybe playback was stuck on some earlier footage. That happened sometimes if the DVR reset. To test it, he flicked his eyes to another camera, live view of the ground floor lobby, and waved his hand inside the booth, visible through the lobby glass. On the screen, he watched his own faint reflection move at the same time he moved his hand. Live. No delay. He quickly switched back to the fourth-floor corridor. The figure was still there, still not moving, still turned slightly away from the camera. Arjun pressed the talk button on his handheld radio out of sheer instinct, even though he knew there was no one else on his channel at that hour. He heard only his own breath and a faint hiss of static, then the click as he released the button. He felt the hairs on his arms rise. Something in his stomach tightened, a quiet animal instinct whispering that this wasn't a technical issue. It was something standing alone on the fourth floor, in the dark, where no one was supposed to be. For a long moment he did nothing, just stared at the flickering black and white image and listened to his own breathing. A part of his mind, the rational part, kept trying to break things down into steps. Check the logs again. Call the facility manager. Maybe call the night patrol car. But another part of him, the part that had grown used to empty floors and predictable routines, felt almost offended by that unmoving figure, as if it was a deliberate intrusion into his quiet night. Like someone had stepped into his deeply familiar dream and refused to play by its rules. He forced himself to stand up. The swivel chair creaked and rolled back as he reached for the set of master keys hanging on a hook and for the heavy flashlight under the desk. The ray of white beam cut across the booth as he tested it. Bright. Working. For a second, he considered calling the outsourced patrol car that made rounds of the entire IT park, but the thought of another guard laughing at him for being scared of a glitch kept him quiet. What was he going to say? There's a figure on the camera who isn't moving? They'd think he'd fallen asleep and imagined it. Besides, if it was a real person up there, a drunk, a thief, or some employee who'd lied about leaving, then it was his job to go check. He reminded himself of that. Responsibilities. Procedures. The more he repeated those words, the less it felt like he was walking into something unknown and more like he was doing a perfectly normal sweep. He stepped out of the booth, locking the glass door behind him out of habit. The lobby beyond the glass was dimly lit. Most of the overhead lights were off to save power, leaving only a few fixtures glowing along the walls. The sound of his own footsteps on the polished tile floor echoed more than he liked. As he walked toward the elevator, he kept glancing at the reflection in the glass door to the parking lot outside, half expecting to see someone behind him. There was no one. He pressed the elevator button. A soft electronic chime broke the silence, followed by the distant whir of machinery as the elevator car started moving somewhere above. While he waited, he tried to calm his breathing. He told himself he would step out on the fourth floor, shine his light down the corridor, and whoever it was would either run, explain themselves, or vanish into embarrassment when caught. Simple. The doors slid open with a muted ding. He stepped inside, pressed 4, and watched the numbers light up as the elevator climbed. 1, 2, 3, 4. The car jolted gently to a stop. For a heartbeat, he hoped the doors would refuse to open, that some technical fault would force him to go back and call building maintenance. Instead, the doors parted smoothly with a soft hiss. The fourth-floor corridor stretched out before him, lit only by a motion-activated strip of lights along the ceiling. Usually, when an employee walked out, the sensors would trigger the lights in a wave as they moved. Now, only the area right in front of the elevator was illuminated. Beyond that, the corridor disappeared into darkness, with only the red glow of an exit sign faintly visible at the far end where the fire exit door was. That was where the figure had been standing on the monitor. Arjun stepped out, his boots making dull thuds on the carpet. He flicked on the flashlight and swept the beam down the hallway. Desks, glass partitions, closed doors with company logos. Everything looked exactly as usual. The beam reached the end, bounced off the metal push bar of the fire exit door, and the plain white wall beside it. No one was there. He felt a brief, ridiculous wave of relief so strong it almost made his knees weak. Of course, it had to be the DVR looping old footage. The person he'd seen on the monitor was long gone. Maybe filmed days ago, even. He was already telling himself that story as he walked further down the corridor, just to be thorough. When he reached the fire exit, he pushed the bar gently. The door didn't move. It was locked from the inside with a key cylinder, as it should be at night. He checked the small glass pane inset in the door. Beyond it was the emergency stairwell, lit by a dim light on the landing. Empty. He turned away, about to head back toward the elevator, when he noticed something on the floor near the corner where the corridor met the wall. At first he thought it was a shadow, just a darker patch of carpet. But when he lowered the flashlight beam, he saw that it was a set of footprints. Darker, wet-looking outlines of bare feet, slightly smeared into the gray fabric. They started about 2 meters from the fire exit door and led down the corridor, away from him, vanishing halfway along, as if they'd simply stopped existing. Arjun's throat went dry. The prints were small, like a child's, but the toes were long and oddly spaced, and there were too many of them on each foot. He counted quickly in the harsh white beam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 toes? He jerked the light away involuntarily, his heart leaping into his mouth. A chill spread across his skin despite the warmth of the building. Every instinct screamed at him to run back to the elevator, go to his booth, and lock the door. Pretend he'd never seen the camera feed, never noticed the footprints, never stepped out. But that same animal part of him that had been offended at the intrusion earlier now clung to something else, the desperate need to know. He forced himself to follow the prints, at least where they existed. The pattern went like this: 2 or 3 clear, wet impressions, then a faint smear, then nothing. Then, a little further along, another faint partial print on the edge of the carpet, as if whoever had made them had paused with 1 foot half on and half off. They led past the glass doors of the startup's office, which were dark now, the logo barely visible in the gloom. As he walked, he became acutely aware of how quiet it was. Even the building's usual background noises, the distant hum of air conditioning, the occasional clank of pipes, felt muffled, as if the very air were holding its breath. He could hear the soft rasp of his own breathing and the tiny clicks of his boots on the floor. Every time his flashlight beam shook, the shadows along the walls seemed to twitch. When he reached the point where the last footprint vanished, he stopped. The corridor in front of him looked perfectly normal. To his right were glass partition walls. To his left, plain painted drywall with framed motivational posters. Innovation never sleeps. Dream big. Work late. One of the frames hung slightly crooked, as if someone had brushed against it. He didn't remember it being that way. He lifted the flashlight and slowly moved the beam along the wall. When the light passed over the crooked frame, it reflected briefly in the thin sheet of glass. And for just a split second, he saw something that made his heart stop. There was a face behind him, not in the corridor. There was nothing there when he spun around, swinging the beam wildly in a full circle. Empty carpet, empty air. But in that tiny rectangle of reflected glass, just for an instant, he had seen a pale, oval shape over his shoulder. Eyes too big, dark and empty, set too far apart. A mouth that looked wrong, too wide, with the corners pulled back as if someone had cut them by hand. The expression hadn't been angry or sad. It had been curious. The beam shook in his hands. Sweat broke out along his spine. He forced himself to look back at the frame. The reflection now showed only the empty corridor, the faint glow of the exit sign in the distance, and his own trembling silhouette. Nothing else. That did it. Whatever curiosity had kept him moving dissolved into raw, simple fear. He backed away, not turning his back on that stretch of corridor until he reached the safety of the elevator door. His finger stabbed at the call button again and again, even though the light was already on. When the doors finally slid open, he practically fell inside, jabbing the button for the ground floor. As the elevator descended, he found himself staring at his own reflection in the metal door, afraid that at any second, another face might appear next to his. He didn't breathe until the doors opened to the dimly lit lobby, and he stepped out, hurrying back to his glass booth like a diver lunging for the surface. Inside, surrounded by familiar clutter, the logbook, the kettle, the grimy monitor, he felt a little safer. Not safe, exactly, but shielded by routine. He locked the booth door, more to feel in control than because it would stop anything that could appear in reflections. Then he turned to the monitor. The fourth-floor corridor camera showed nothing now. Just the long, gray strip of carpet and the exit door at the end. No figure. No flicker. No movement. The timestamp rolled forward, unbroken. He almost convinced himself he had imagined everything, until he noticed the small, dark smears on the corridor floor in the image. Fainter in black and white, but definitely there if you knew where to look. Those wrong, Six-toed footprints. Arjun found himself unable to look away from that one camera feed. Even when he forced his gaze to move across the grid, the empty parking lot, the idle elevators, the blank stairwells, it kept snapping back to that fourth-floor corridor, to the faint smudges that he knew were wrong, even if any stranger glancing at the screen might dismiss them as noise. He tried to think of what to write in the logbook. There was a procedure for almost everything. Unattended vehicles, unauthorized visitors, malfunctioning alarms. There was nothing for possible six-toed footprints on carpet. Might belong to something that looks at you only in reflections. He ended up writing nothing. His pen hovered over the page for a few seconds. Then he snapped the book shut. For the next half hour, he told himself he would do nothing but his job. Monitor, patrol if necessary, file his hourly check. But time seemed to thicken, like cooled syrup. Every minute stretched itself thin. The quiet that had used to feel lazy and safe now felt alert, listening. Twice he thought he heard something faint through the glass, a distant, irregular tapping, like someone's fingernails on metal. Both times, when he opened the booth door and leaned into the lobby, there was nothing but the hum of the emergency lights and the muted whine of the elevator motor resting somewhere above. At 1:30 a.m. sharp, his phone buzzed on the desk, making him jump so hard he nearly knocked over his cup. He grabbed it. It was a WhatsApp message from his friend Vivek, another security guard working the night at a hotel across town. "Bye, sleepwalking again," the message said, followed by a laughing emoji. Arjun exhaled, some of the tension in his chest loosening. He typed back quickly with clumsy fingers. "On duty. IT Park. Bored but awake." He hesitated, then added, "CCTV just showed something weird on fourth floor. Might be glitch." Vivek replied almost immediately. "Weird how? Someone making out in the server room type weird, or horror movie weird?" "Footprints," Arjun wrote. "And I think I saw something. Face in reflection. Could be my eyes." He hit send, then stared at the message, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Even phrased like that, it sounded crazier on screen than it had in his head. There was a longer pause this time before the reply came. "Don't go alone to check again," Vivek wrote. No emoji. "Call your shift supervisor if something is off. Remember that guy at Galaxy Mall who fell in the service stairwell because he chased a silhouette on CCTV? Manager still says it was stress." Arjun knew that story. Every night guard in the city had heard some version of it. A man swore he saw someone in the closed mall at 3 a.m. The camera showed a dark blur near the fire exit. The guard thought it was a thief and ran after it. They found him at the bottom of the stairs with his neck broken. The footage, when reviewed, showed him running full speed down an empty corridor, then tripping over nothing. He swallowed and glanced at the landline phone mounted on the wall of his booth. The night duty officer's number was taped next to it. If he called and they sent someone to check, and it turned out to be a smear, a trick of light, he'd go down as that guard. Nervous. Superstitious. Not worth keeping on night shift. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid on time. His family depended on that money. His thumb hovered over his phone keyboard as he typed and erased 3 different responses to Vivek. Finally he sent, "All good now. Must be glitch. I'll do extra round at 3. He put the phone face down on the table, as if that might stop more questions from appearing. Time crawled. At some point, the kettle's tiny heating coil clicked off, and the booth smelled faintly of overboiled tea. He didn't make more. His stomach was already restless. The clock on the wall, a cheap plastic thing with a faded logo, showed 2:17 a.m. when a soft chime sounded through the lobby. It was the elevator. Arjun froze. He hadn't pressed any button. No one had come in through the main gate. His booth was right there facing it, and the outer door's bell always rang when opened. Yet, he heard the distinct, familiar sound of the elevator car arriving at a floor, followed by the low mechanical sigh of doors sliding open. His eyes snapped to the monitor. One of the camera squares showed the interior of the elevator. It was empty, but the floor indicator inside, a tiny panel above the door, showed 4. The camera facing the 4th-floor elevator lobby showed the doors open to the dark corridor, just as they had when he had stepped out before. Only this time, no one was there. No security guard with a flashlight, no human figure at all. He stared as the empty doorway remained open for a full, unnatural 15 seconds, longer than it usually should. Then, just as the doors began to slide shut, something flickered across the gap. Not a person, Not exactly. More like a smudge of deeper darkness. Vertical, too tall and too thin, as if a shadow had forgotten it needed someone to cast it. The doors closed on it. The floor indicator changed from 4 to 1. The elevator was coming down. Every instinct screamed at him not to let it open into the lobby. His booth door was locked, but the idea of that car arriving, doors sliding open, killing the already thin line between up there and down here, filled him with a fear so pure it felt almost childish. He grabbed the booth phone and jabbed at the internal extension code for the elevator maintenance company without thinking. The line rang twice, then cut to a recorded female voice. "Our office hours are from." He slammed the receiver down, heart thudding. The chimes sounded in the lobby again. This time it was just a few meters behind him, muffled through the glass. He turned, still clutching the phone handset like a weapon. Through the booth's window, he could see the stainless steel doors of the elevator. The floor indicator above them showed G. The little arrow stopped blinking. The doors did not open. He stared, unable to look away. Seconds dragged. The lobby lights flickered ever so slightly, like a candle in a draft. The building's hum seemed to recede, leaving only a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The doors stayed closed. There was no movement behind the scene between them, no shadow, no light change. After nearly a minute, the indicator above the elevator changed by itself. 1, 2, 3, 4. The car was ascending again. Arjun's skin crawled. He watched as the fourth-floor lobby camera updated, doors opening to the empty corridor once more. But this time, something was different. On the corridor floor, just within the edge of the camera's field of view, a new set of prints was forming. Not all at once, like paint spilled, but one by one, as if someone unseen stepped out onto the carpet. The first footprint darkened, then another, a little further away, toes pointing down the hall, away from the elevator. Then a third, and a fourth, leading out of frame toward the fire exit. Arjun's breath came in short, sharp bursts. He felt dizzy, as if he were watching this from underwater. The camera had no audio, but in his mind, he could hear it. Soft, wet slaps of bare feet on carpet. He realized he was backing away from the monitor without intending to, until his shoulders hit the back wall of the booth. On the far right side of the screen, in the tiny square that showed the emergency stairwell's landing between the 4th and 5th floors, a flicker of motion caught his eye. A small shape moved past the lens, quick and spider-like. It was gone before his brain could process it. The radio on his belt crackled. The sound was so sudden and so loud in the quiet booth that he yelped, his hand flying to the device. No one should be on his channel at this hour. The patrol car used a different frequency. The housekeeping staff had already signed out and left their radios in the control room. "Hello," he said, voice shaking. "Security post A, who is this?" For a moment, there was only the hiss of static. Then, buried in it so faintly he thought at first it was interference, came a sound. It wasn't a voice speaking words, not clearly. It was more like a breath pressed into the shape of syllables, a kind of wet whisper, too low and too close. "Open." Arjun's fingers went numb. The radio slipped from his hand and hit the desk. It crackled again as it struck, and for the briefest second the whisper grew louder, clearer, as if slamming it had twisted the dial to full volume. "Let me out." He slammed his palm down on the power button, cutting the sound off mid-syllable.